What's up guys, I just wanted to take a moment before we got to my opening montage of clips to announce that it has been 1 year since I started making videos on YouTube. 1 year to the day since I did my Friday the 13th Part 8 review. Time went by fast despite my slow climb in subscribers. Some of you got here at the start when my editing and talking weren't very good. Some of you came by during that weird middle period where I didn't quite know what direction I wanted to go in as a YouTube reviewer. And some of you got here recently now that I've kind of finally figured out how I want to present myself. My main inspirations to do videos like these were channels like Hats Off Entertainment and The Real Gyms, as well as some of the earlier YouTube personalities like James Rolfe, Doug Walker, and Brad Jones. And shout out to Red Letter Media, even though my videos are nothing like theirs, there's a little bit of inspiration there too. Some people would see the slow increase of subscribers and say, well, this YouTube thing was worth a shot, but I guess it's time to pack it in. But honestly, while having a huge following and partnership would be great, I do this more so out of enjoyment and passion for the material in which I speak of. I wouldn't have kept doing these videos if I didn't enjoy making them and entertaining those who stop in on my channel. I just want to say I appreciate all of you guys, and going into year 2, I have a lot more gas in the tank. Thanks for your continued support, and I hope to keep entertaining you for years to come.
You don't think there's anything amiss? I'm sitting here wearing a red and white checked gingham dress and army boots. You think that's unamiss?
No, of course not. It's just we thought you'd gone nuts. We were trying to humor you.
I was just doing a little test. A little test to see if you'd gone crazy.
I think I'm going to be sick.
Don't get angry, that's what it wants.
Lister and Mother, it's a dream come true.
So energetic. I honestly thought my false teeth were going to fall out. How lovely. The positions you bent me into.
Terrific! That sounds enchanting. Well done.
And the things this boy can do with alphabeti spaghetti.
Call it, Arnie.
Alphabeti spaghetti!
Look, I'm gonna go inside now. It gets a little bit hot. I get a bit claustrophobic in these suits.
Take your helmet off.
What?
You're hot. Take your helmet off.
I'll die.
Why?
There's no oxygen out here.
Hey, oxygen's for losers. Come on.
I need oxygen.
You don't need anything, King. You're the king.
You're crazy.
I told you needed oxygen, huh? Some loser who was trying to make you feel small. Look, I'll prove it to you. I'll take mine off first. We'll soon see who the crazy one is around here.
No!
For those of you that have been following me for a while, you pretty much understand my taste profile at this point. I like science fiction, 80s horror, 90s comedy, and animation, and crap that was around when I was a kid. But very few people know that I absolutely adore British comedy. Well, some of it. But among all the programs from the UK that I love, one stands out as my all-time favorite, and that's Blackadder. But coming in a close second is Red Dwarf. Red Dwarf is that perfect blend of science fiction and comedy. It satirizes Star Trek and other movies and shows in the sci-fi genre, but it doesn't straight up insult them. It's a comedy, but it has its share of serious moments too. It isn't insulting to the intelligence because, well, it uses technobabble and theoretical astrophysics.
So what is it?
I've never seen one before. No one has, but I'm guessing it's a white hole.
A white hole?
Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. A black hole sucks time and matter out of the universe. A white hole returns it.
It doesn't get totally ridiculous with it. Well, not all the time. Red Dwarf follows Dave Lister, third technician aboard the Jupiter Mining Corporation ship Red Dwarf. Lister is a bum, he enlisted while drunk, and is now going across the universe fixing broken suit machines. Well, assisting in fixing them, as he works under second technician Arnold Judas Rimmer, a tight-ass, unlikable cunt who thinks he deserves the world despite literally doing nothing to earn it. I'm gonna go ahead and say it, Rimmer's my favorite character. He is so unlikable that he actually kind of just doubles over and starts becoming likable. It's impressive. It's impressive character writing. After being put in stasis for bringing an unquarantined cat aboard the Red Dwarf, there's a radiation leak on the ship that kills every member of the crew besides Lister and his cat Frankenstein. Frankenstein had kittens that eventually populated the ship and over the course of 3 million years evolved into a humanoid life form. Upon awakening from stasis and being told that everyone's dead,
Rimmer! He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Wait. Are you trying to tell me everybody's dead?
should have never let him out in the first place.
And that it's been 3 million years by the ship's now senile computer Holly, Lister is reunited with a sentient hologram of Arnold Rimmer and with the descendant of his cat, simply named the Cat. And they go on all sorts of wacky space romps together. After being a one-off appearance in Season 2, the crew is joined in Season 3 by Crichton, a service android who was left on a space colony for millions of years alone. Red Dwarf was created by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor and was based off their series of BBC Radio 4 comedy sketches titled Dave Holland's Space Cadet. I won't go too deep into the history right now because A, I'm just copying the actual facts off Wikipedia, and B, I'll probably do a full-on thing of Red Dwarf in the future. But the show was picked up in 87, first aired in 88, and continued to air consistently from 1988 to 1992, and then inconsistently through the 90s before getting revived in the 2010s. Red Dwarf featured an episodic format. This meant that all the plots were self-contained within their one episode. There were some exceptions, or some recurring elements, or an ongoing story arc, but for the most part, each plot was one and done and on to the next one. Episodes would follow one of three subject matters: the space anomaly, some sort of creature, which I feel I should note, they never had aliens on Red Dwarf. Aliens do not exist in the Red Dwarf universe. Every creature they encounter has origins with humans, they're man-made. Alternatively, episodes could also feature a technology gone mad scenario, or just be a plain old character development one. There's a lot of character development in this show, despite being an episodic sitcom. I kinda love it. You get things such as Lister coming to grips with the reality that he's the last human alive, or Rimmer having some sort of personality growth, or Crichton trying to break his programming. Red Dwarf's humor was similar to your conventional British comedy humor, but it was a little different. Like, there was plenty of dry or witty remarks.
It's gonna be one of those days.
But a lot of it was in response to outlandish sci-fi scenarios. The dialogue was quick and snappy, but a lot of it wasn't drawn out like some other British comedies. It was quick and to the point, and I can really see why Red Dwarf took off with American audiences. Like, I have friends who flat out refuse to watch British comedy because it's like, oh, I don't fucking like British humor, I don't like how they talk, I don't understand the slang. Red Dwarf does use the UK slang, but it doesn't overdo it. You kind of always get what they're going on about. And if you don't, you can still enjoy the wondrous sci-fi scenarios, but it's really not a difficult show to get into at all. Seasons 1 and 2 were shot on stage, had a low budget, and felt more like a traditional studio audience sitcom, relying more on the character reactions than on the outlandish special effects. I kind of like seasons 1 and 2 the best. They're very comforting to watch. Low budget in a sci-fi is usually something that would take you out of the show, but because this is a satire, it works perfectly well. Typically, the saying is show don't tell, but since Red Dwarf in its first 2 seasons had such a low budget, they had to rely on dialogue to tell what was happening. They had to use the most practical, cheap, efficient effects to get the point across that something science fiction-y was going on, and for what they had, they did a perfect job of it. Seasons 3 to 6 were shot more like a traditional television program. They had better cameras, better effects, more on-location shooting. They still maintained the studio audience aspect of the show, but it started to pivot and become less of a live studio sitcom and become more of a comedic space adventure show. Now, while I enjoy rewatching seasons 1 and 2 the most, I would be an idiot not to say that I think seasons 3 and 4 are bar none the best made seasons in the show, both from a presentation standpoint and from a writing standpoint. And then we get into season 5, which is similar to 3 and 4, but it's the weak one. They start to get really formulaic at this point, and while it's still entertaining, outside of 2 episodes, it lacks the substance of its predecessors. Clearly, I'm not the only one who thought season 5 was getting a little stale, because they actually tried to change things up in season 6. Instead of being on the titular Red Dwarf ship, they were on Starbug, their space shuttle, as they went through the universe trying to find Red Dwarf. Throughout the series, it was a source of humor that Rimmer, being a hologram, couldn't touch anything. He was just a light projection. So, to change up the formula, they gave him a hard light drive, which made him solid and allowed him to interact with the environment around him. The overall quality of the season 6 episodes is superior to season 5, but by this point in time, the show had kind of started to wear its welcome out. It was running on the fumes of the great chemistry between its cast members. While season 6 is better than season 5, I can still kind of sense that the writers were getting burned out. I mean, there wasn't as many quality episodes. Don't get me wrong, Gunman of the Apocalypse is probably one of the best Red Dwarf episodes ever made, but that's really the only episode that, off the top of my head, I remember beat for beat. The Emo Hawk episode episode is a fine example of them maybe being burned out because it relies on callbacks to earlier seasons. What really lends credibility to me thinking the writers were burned out was that season 6 ended on a major cliffhanger and there was a several-year gap between season 6 and 7. Seasons 7 and 8 have their moments. The first episode of season 7 is definitely a top 10 episode, but I don't particularly like the rest of 7 and 8. Specifically season 7. They're shot on different cameras, make use of a lot of CGI, and kinda stray away from the original product. I won't talk about the most recent seasons too much besides saying from what I've seen, they're pretty good. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the UK series, because I am gonna double back over to it. I am gonna probably do either a top 10 or some individual episode reviews. Who knows? I'm not done with Red Dwarf at this point. It's just in case somebody was more of a casual viewer, I wanted them to understand some of the production history of Red Dwarf. But with that being said, let's dial it back now to around when season 5 was airing. By this point, the show had become popular overseas in North America due to being run on PBS. Now, for any overseas viewers who aren't familiar with North American television, PBS, the public broadcasting service, often ran British shows late at night. And this is where most Americans and Canadians were exposed to stuff like Monty Python, Red Dwarf, Fawlty Towers, Benny Hill, Blackadder, etc. I remember watching the show with my dad every weekend, staying up late to see it, and I was hooked. But by season 5, American networks started to take notice and wanted in. So Grant and Naylor were flown from the UK to Los Angeles to speak with NBC about creating an American adaptation of Red Dwarf. Now, rather than having NBC just license out the name and do their own thing with it, NBC decided to bring Grant and Naylor aboard to help develop the American version of the show. And right here's the first problem. Because Grant and Naylor and the American writers had several clashes in the writers' room. What was funny to American writers wasn't funny to the British writers, and vice versa. It felt like NBC wanted to make an American version of the show, and Grant and Naylor wanted to just make the British version but with American actors. The issue here is rather than get a unique take on Red Dwarf geared towards American general viewing audiences, we were given a watered-down version of the British show with some American jokes and references peppered in. Despite the difficulties in pre-production, however, the studio did manage to put together a pilot. Now, the first pilot is very similar to the original Red Dwarf pilot titled The End, but with a few key differences. The most major of these differences being that Crichton is a part of the team right from the get-go, and he's played by Robert Llewellyn from the original show. I'm not gonna lie, it kinda bugs me that they did this because A, it's blatantly disrupting the production of the original show, and B, it seems like a desperate ploy to resemble the original show, which if the original show was so fucking popular, why not just license it for broadcast on NBC? Anyway, Crichton's in it, nothing we can do about it. They were clearly trying to make him the second player as opposed to Rimmer in the original show, but let's move on. Lister in this version is played by actor Craig Bierko, who you may remember from, I don't know, I don't recognize him from anything in particular. I don't have an issue with the actor, he really did try, but considering Lister's supposed to be a trash bag loser, this handsome chiseled guy doesn't really hit the mark. There's a few differences with the presentation of Lister in this one versus the original. For one, he's with Kochanski, he gets dumped by Kochanski in the first episode, which they kind of changed this up because in the original pilot, Lister seems like he's chasing Kochanski, but she just doesn't even really give him the time of day. But later on they retcon it that he got dumped, so they kind of worked in the retcon into this one. It's interesting. They kind of went for a Han Solo thing with Lister, and that's fine, I guess. It works for an American version, but they still have him kind of act like a loser. But honestly, one of the biggest complaints was that he was too handsome to be Lister. I think it's fine. I think he could have worked with it because he is a talented actor. He does a pretty good job being a pathetic loser despite not looking like a pathetic loser.
God, I'm such a loser. I mean, in a sick way, it's really kind of impressive, you know? I started out with absolutely nothing. And I couldn't hang on to it.
Rimmer is played by this guy who fucking completely sucks. No disrespect to the actor, but total miscast. They cast him like he was some catty, gay-sounding dude, and I really don't get why. He fucking sucks. He does not live up to the character at all.
I'm the only one alive on the whole ship.
All 5,000 people wiped out? This is terrific. I'm in charge.
Holly, on the other hand, is the best casting besides Bierko. They cast Jane Leeves, who would later go on to star in the hit show Frasier, and she plays the role really well. She hits that fine medium between the Norman Lovett version of Holly and the Hattie Haderidge version of Holly.
You okay?
Of course I'm not okay. I'm now 2.9 million years over my rated lifespan. My memory is shot, all my circuits are breaking down. Actually, that one felt kind of good.
And then there's the cat who... He's played by Hinton Battle, who in a weird case of irony was one of original Cat actor Danny John Jules' inspirations for dance theater. He's okay, but it suffers because while Lister and Rimmer are vastly different from the UK counterparts, he's mostly the same, just not British.
This is mine! Oh, look at this! Oh, it's mine!
Stop it! You keep repeating the same words over and over. You're gonna drive us nuts.
I don't care.
Well, how is the pilot itself? It's not very good, but honestly, being a Dwarf fan for years, I remember hearing over and over how god-awful this was. I was expecting this to be the second coming of the fucking Holocaust. Some people claimed it was one of the worst things ever filmed, and it's really not. Basically, it runs the same way as the end, has a few different moments such as Crichton's little arc, and while it does repeat some jokes from the original and badly, it actually does have a few of its own jokes that I think are actually pretty good and play themselves well to the intended American audience.
How long have I been in stasis, Holly?
Well, I couldn't let you out until the radiation died down to a safe level. Really? You're gonna laugh.
How long?
Just under 3 million years.
My baseball cards must be worth a fortune.
They had more of a budget for some aspects, but then they reused stock footage for other aspects. It's not that bad. I see something that could have been worked with. Ultimately, NBC was not happy with the first pilot, and they decided to go back to the drawing board. A second pilot was produced, and this was more of a montage of scenes with Lister kind of giving context to them via the captain's log thing or whatever. Some of the scenes were just remakes of Red Dwarf UK scenes, such as the Wilma Flintstone dialogue, and some of Marooned. Instead of the original Rimmer actor, we actually got a new actor who was a little closer to an Americanized version of Rimmer. I actually like this guy a lot better than the first one. He's no Chris Berry, but he was okay.
I can't believe it. I'm dead.
What's it feel like?
Death? It's like being at an Amish bachelor party.
The major difference in Pilot 2, however, is the cat. Now, throughout the years, Red Dwarf has had a weird thing about female characters. Aside from one-offs, up to this point, they had never had a female character that was anything more than a recurring part, like Kachansky in Season 1. For the second pilot, they cast Terry Jadzia Dax Farrell as a female version of the cat, and they made her a fearless badass and sexed her up a bit. The original cat was always depicted as being similar to a spoiled, snotty house cat. He's always primping himself, cleaning himself, making sure he looks good, he only cares about himself and his suits. The US version from the second pilot, they take the idea of an outdoor cat or a feral cat. She's fearless, instead of running from the monster, she wants to hunt and kill it like an outdoor cat would, and she makes a lot of overt sexual references. I appreciate this. I appreciate that they tried to take it in a different direction and do something different. It's nice, it's nice. I appreciate new things.
So you're never gonna get involved with anybody, is that it?
Well, who knows? Maybe someday I'll find the 8 or 9 guys who are right for me, and then my rambling days will be over.
8 or 9?
The second pilot hits the mark on the humor a little bit better. Even Craig Bierko kind of started to fall into the role of Lister, or at least this depiction of it a little better. I think he could have worked fine if the shadow of the original didn't constantly loom over production. Unfortunately, the second pilot didn't work out either, but they were still gonna try. NBC wanted Chris Berry to jump over and take over the role of Rimmer for a third pilot, which at this point, what the fuck is even the point of doing an American version? But nevertheless, it was never meant to be, and the project was cancelled. It became part of Red Dwarf mythos, and it would only exist as a work print shown at conventions. You can buy it on DVD, like a bootleg at conventions, and it's out there. Everybody thought it was lost forever, but no, it's just been out there. It never aired, neither pilot aired, but it's out there, as you can see by the fact that I'm using clips from it. I personally think it's a shame that this didn't work, because quite frankly, it wasn't horrible. There was something to work with here. Craig Bierko, while appearing to be miscast, was charming and a decent actor. I think his interpretation of Lister could have worked if it had time to play itself out. They just didn't do enough to make it different, and I honestly think it's because they had the two British creators involved. There was far too much pulling back and forth between NBC and Grant and Naylor. I know the two British writers probably wanted to see that the American adaptation gets done right, but at that point it became counterproductive. It needed to be one or the other. It couldn't have been a mixed bag. I think the worst, most tacky part of the USA pilot pilot, besides the fucking horrid casting of Rimmer in the first one, is the recycled jokes from the original series. Sure, for people who had never seen the original, it wouldn't be that bad, but even still, a lot of them kinda get lost in translation and just should have been dropped or reworked altogether.
You're a robot, right?
It shows?
Only to the trained eye.
God, what kind of robot are you? You look like a gigantic novelty condom.
Because like I said, there are a fair amount of people in the West who just aren't really into the whole British humor thing, so they really should have tried harder to gear the humor more towards American audiences. And you might say, oh, but that'd just be dumbing it down. It's like, okay, look, there's such thing as being lost in translation. Let's look at when they adapted that 70s show in the UK, and instead of rewriting it completely, what they did was they took the existing scripts for that 70s show, replaced a few American concepts with British ones, and just made it like that, and the show fucking bombed. It's considered one of the worst fucking international adaptations ever made. Despite its issues, there are certain aspects that could have worked with the Red Dwarf USA if the writers wanted to be a little more ambitious. Take for example, in the opening of the pilot, they show this very Verhoeven-esque montage of the Red Dwarf ship, followed by the introduction of the hologram concept. Now, hindsight is 2020, but I really think they should have taken the initial concept of Red Dwarf and made the world sort of a capitalist dystopia. The original did have aspects of this thrown in, but I think the US version could have taken the concept and really ran in its own direction with it. Make it sort of like if Seinfeld was set inside of a Paul Verhoeven sci-fi movie, with all the dark humor and jabs at modern consumerism present in the waning years of the Cold War. Sadly, something like this would have been more suited for a cable late night broadcast and not broadcast television, but who knows. Another thing I want to shout out is the theme song, because well, not as good as the iconic original two themes, it has its own tone that is appropriate for this particular show. I like the US theme song. Some people have said it's awful, but I think it fits perfectly for what it should have been. A late night American sci-fi comedy show. I'm gonna play it over the end credits. At the end of the day, Red Dwarf kept going and maintained its status of popularity in the UK and its cult status overseas, and most of the actors in the US version went on to be somewhat successful. Craig Bierko would continue to act in film and television to this day. Jane Leaves, as mentioned, went on to star in Frasier as Daphne. Hinton Battle continued to pursue dance theater shit or whatever. The Rimmers probably did something. Robert Llewellyn went back to the UK and continued acting. And Terry Farrell went on to be in the greatest Star Trek show of all time, which I feel I should mention is a role she got because she had Red Dwarf USA on her resume. They asked if she did Sci-Fi before, and she said yes, and the rest is history. There is a documentary about Red Dwarf USA on one of the Red Dwarf DVDs, I think it's season 4 or 5, where the crew talks about it and why it wouldn't work, with many citing that the direction the NBC producers wanted to take it in was the reason, saying Lister should have been played by John Belushi or an actor like John Belushi, talking about how the American humor didn't land with the British writers and whatnot. The most interesting thing, however, is when Hattie Hadridge was asked, she said she grabbed a bootleg DVD at a con expecting it to be bad, and then she said it wasn't even that bad, which it wasn't. It just needed to be something other than what they did. I think it's the fault of both NBC and Grant and Naylor. It needed to be vastly different from what either side wanted, but sadly, that's just not how Hollywood works. If you like Red Dwarf and you haven't seen the two US pilots, they're up on YouTube. There's a fan edit that cleans it up and makes it look presentable, although some of the stuff I think was cut for pacing, I don't know. It's interesting to see, and it's not as bad as everybody says. It could have worked, but unfortunately it didn't. So there we have it, Red Dwarf USA, the first part of my Generation Wineversary rollback catch-up thing. That title does not roll off the tongue. I'm gonna think of another one for the next video. Which, speaking of the next video, we're gonna be taking a look at the 1993 Super Mario Bros. Movie. What pisses me off is I actually did have a completed review of this. It was at a point in time where I wasn't really good at time management, so it would have been an hour, but that's okay because the audio completely desynced on it because I wasn't using fucking Premiere to edit. It was just a whole shit show. I had to throw it out. But now things are gonna be different. Now, as this video comes to a close, I would like to leave all my viewers with some life-changing words of wisdom, and what better source for these than reciting something my father once said to me after drinking an entire 2-4 of beer. Son, follow your dreams of being a filmmaker so that you can make money and then I'll never have to work or beg your grandfather for money again. Good night, America.
You've been stuck here for 3 million years? What have you been doing?
Well, I've been reading that fire exit sign over there.